Neil Howe, author of Fourth Turning, The Fourth Turning is Here. The Fourth Turning is a seasonal period of history. The conflict in a fourth turning arises because different factions disagree on how we're going to reestablish a new system that works. Everyone wants a more powerful system, but people have mutually irreconcilable visions of what that system will look like. And that's a power struggle. Both sides can't win. The hard truth about history is that community flourishes in conflict. You know, this is something that people don't like to hear. But if you think about how strong community was in the late 1940s and 1950s, we like to idealize that as the American high. People left their doors unlocked. You could go out and, ask, borrow someone else's sugar, from the person next door. Everyone thought alike. Everyone was polite to each other. We idealize that, but we forget that was all in the shadow of an enormous conflict, which scared people straight on the issue of having to get along with each other, right? There would be no American high had there not been a war before it. We expect conflict, right? We expect conflict. You can imagine the two partisan drives, right? MAGA versus the Democrats, for example. I can even imagine secession. Not secession in the sense of regional split, but one party just is simply deciding to pull out of Congress, right? If you had asked people 5 years ago, they would have said that's kind of unimaginable. I don't think it's unimaginable today anymore. Barbara Walter, who studied civil wars all over the world, she says the one thing when she interviews people about civil wars in their country, and it's everywhere from Southeast Asia to Biafra. I mean, she's been everywhere, right? And she says the one thing they all say, we never saw it coming. The fourth turning will largely be good for property investors for several reasons. One is fourth turnings are always times of accelerating inflation. That's how we burden share during fourth turning. We have a huge amount of public mobilization, extra demands on the economy, so inflation is part of how we finance that. And it turns out historically that real estate, generally, property in particular, along with commodities, do very well with high and accelerating inflation. There's going to be a renewed emphasis on building things during a fourth turning. New infrastructure, new kinds of communities, new kinds of residences. So one thing that very often happens at the climax of a fourth turning, when the fourth turning is over, is a new social contract that enables ordinary people to actually buy residences. It's a great time for building. Think about the last time we had these eras. Would have been, the 1940s, obviously a huge amount of building during the war, and just after the war. One downside is the fact that population will be declining. I would say the biggest danger that we see in this pattern as it's advanced so far starts with the rural areas. Look at rural Japan, look at rural Italy. I mean, these places are really depopulating. And what you see in all these places is the rural areas depopulate fastest, because where the jobs still and the economic activities still are the big urban areas, and to some extent they're still growing, but at huge expense to the rural. Now, the United States is still growing demographically. We still have a large, positive, legal immigration to this country. So we will continue to be population positive in terms of growth all the way into the 2030s and 2040s. So we don't face that problem quite as much. And let me add this, typically after a fourth turning, we often have a baby boom, right? Baby booms following crises are very common. We had something very much like that after the Civil War. We had an enormous one after World War II. Think of all the young people today who say they would like to have children who aren't having children. Well, imagine a new period of peace, calm, community, where they actually will be able to do that, right? Act on that. That's certainly what gave rise to the baby boom in the late 40s and 1950s. Could happen again.